really nice to be here. I came to Croatia in the summer and had a fantastic time, so it's lovely to come back and see such a beautiful city. So today I'm going to be chatting to you about a couple of different topics, both dynamic digital content kind of production, but also real-time expert engagement. What I'm going to try and do is be quite practical, so you can walk out of this room with some things you can actually do. My thinking there is that so many of these talks are very inspirational, but sometimes it's hard to go back into the office tomorrow and try and take these learnings and actually implement them in your workplace. So I'm a doctor by background. I trained as an anaesthetist. I worked clinically for about 5 years, and then I left and became a pharmaceutical medic, working in HIV medicine in GlaxoSmithKline. And then I founded medDigital, which is a medical communications agency specializing in digital activities. We've also created medCrowd, which is an instant messenger for health and care, which I'll add a little bit later. I'm quite connected in with the ABPI on the compliance network and the code working group, and I've also worked with NICE and been on Digital Health London Accelerator. So we've got a great team based in London on the South Bank, just behind the Oxo Tower. We've got a roof terrace with free beer, so come and see us if you're passing through London, and we'll get you a beer, and you can enjoy the views over the Oxo Tower down the River Thames. So we're basically a bunch of scientists with a couple of technologists who build the websites and apps that we also develop. And the scientists are involved in the content production. So we do a number of different things, medical, digital, and commercial activities, mainly around digital content production and management, and that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today to try and help you understand how to do that for the digital world. Okay, so dynamic digital content. What am I talking about? What is dynamic digital content? Well, I guess the point is that content now isn't a campaign. We all know that. You can't do it every 3 months or every 6 months. You have to do it constantly. It's becoming kind of more like a journalist approach, where you're constantly producing things and putting them out there in the real world to engage and interact with the customers. This idea of sending something out, pushing it at your customers, that's gone. And dynamic digital content is getting our heads around doing that with our customers on a kind of daily basis, which is very difficult for big companies to do. I mean, I remember a company was really impressed when it got its approval cycle down to 2 weeks, which is actually quite impressive for a big company. But of course, that's meaningless if you're at a conference. 2 weeks afterwards, the conversation's happened, everybody's gone home, your content is no longer relevant. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about responsive content in real time, what I mean by this dynamic content. I'm going to help you evolve your team, your skills and your team's skills, and then also have a look at how to kind of practically use it. Okay, so the real world changes. It changes at different paces. Sometimes there's fast change, small change, slow change. Sometimes it even goes backwards a bit. But the point is that there's periods of fast change, like maybe around an international conference, where a lot of things might get released, a lot of big decisions made, and practice changes. So generally what Pharma does is they plot a course, maybe a year ahead. Sometimes they even complete the brand plans in springtime for review over the summer, the year before they do that. And there's not much opportunity to really change those dynamically. So sometimes you're trying to predict 18 months ahead, which for me it's impossible in the world we live in. And then what happens is they go through a period of replanning and then readjust to try and follow the real world. The problem with that is that you get these huge gaps, this difference between the real world and what Pharma actually thinks is the real world. And that's the problem. So they're producing content, we're producing content which is out of date, that isn't relevant, that isn't useful to our customers or the patients. And what we need to do is follow the real world very closely so that our content is highly relevant to it. And sometimes even be ahead of it, actually produce material that is thought leadership, that changes thinking, that actually makes that change happen. So I think you'll agree with that. The question is, how do we do it? The benefits of that are that it's faster, you're able to produce content much faster if you're doing it dynamically, in line with the real world, so that it meets customer needs, that it genuinely solves the business issues you face rather than the business issues you thought you were going to face 18 months ago. And then also it can continuously evolve so you can optimize it over time. Okay, so let's have a look at how to actually do that. So I think there's 4 main principles. First is just get on with it. People often overthink things. They spend days planning content plans and whiteboards and mochaccino lattes on bean bags. And actually, if they just go on and started producing, write a blog article and get it live next week, they'll start learning from it and understanding what you need to optimize, what you can improve. The second thing is it must be insight-based. Those insights must fit with your production cycle. There can't be a 6-month market research cut you do, and then you follow that research for 6 months, because in those 6 months, things change. And you must get that insights updated over that time. The third thing is very obvious, is minimizing production effort. But working at big companies, there's often kind of a tendency for people to try and complicate things. They complexify stuff. They say, well, wouldn't it be nice if that person also reviewed it? The answer is no, it wouldn't be nice. It's not nice for them. It's not nice for the people who have to get it reviewed. So if you don't have to get them to review it, don't get them to review it. Simple stuff. Aim at simple things, not the complex things. And then the final thing is to achieve optimal content. So you aim at that content over time, rather than starting with what you think is the perfect version. Okay, so first thing you need to do, start at the beginning, aiming at optimal content. So in order to do that, you need to discover the insights in real time, as you mentioned. There's many different ways of getting insights, and they're all useful. They're all useful at different stages of products. The first one I think is really useful is go and talk to people. Even if you're the global marketing director or medical director, go out there, see people, fly to different countries, spend time with your customers, because they tell you the stuff you need to know. The second thing is do some web and social listening. It's amazing what is available in the public domain, which you can access quite cheaply. Get on Twitter, follow some hashtags, see what people are saying around conferences. There's a huge amount in the public domain that can very quickly inform you about what's going on. Look at your own activities, web and email analytics. It's amazing how many teams I work with who haven't checked their own website analytics and the insights that might give them. And then one thing we recommend is doing digital advisory boards, to touch on a bit, which enable you to get real-time online insight, where things like market research are very blunt. You do like one cut and then wait 3 months before you can do another one. Doing things like real-time advisory boards and things as you go along is very, very useful. Okay, what that does is that means you can change direction. So when you try something new and it goes wrong, instead of cancelling that whole email campaign and saying, well, email doesn't work, or websites don't work because that didn't work, you learn from it and you change your approach, you change direction. And sometimes it can be quite radical, quite difficult at the beginning. You don't really know where to go. But over time, you get better and better, and you find you're trending towards optimal content. And it's the insights on that content that tell you which direction to go. Okay, so how do you practically do that? As promised, some practical steps. So the first thing is to have short weekly meetings, a little half-an-hour call every week to talk about the content plans. It's incredibly powerful. The brilliant thing about that is if somebody doesn't make it, like the medical signatory can't make it 1 week because they're at a conference or on holiday, you've only missed 1 week. Whereas if you had long monthly meetings and they miss one, that's 2 months. And in those meetings, you can just talk about the next couple of weeks. You don't have to talk about the next 6 months. You might have a big plan, that's sitting there as a general direction. You actually just talk about what you need to do now. So the medic, commercial signatories leave that room knowing the things they need to do this week or next week. Very, very practical, very task-based. As I mentioned before, simplifying processes. You often find that people are doing what they're doing because they thought you had to do that. And if you ask somebody and say, do we need 2 signatories? They say, no, the code doesn't require that anymore. And actually, you can use just 1 signatory, a medical signatory. And you can just implement that as a company. And that can transform how quickly you get content through, because it's twice as hard to get 2 people to review it as 1 person. And those kind of little tiny steps are very, very important if you're trying to produce things like blogs at a conference that go live that day with 6 tweets to raise awareness about that blog. If you want to do that quickly, you don't want to be chasing up the commercial signatory who's on holiday or who's not at the conference and is somewhere else. Okay, modular content, I'll come to that in a minute. I'll just show you how we recommend you do that. And this is quite key because there's some detail and skills in how you actually store that content so it becomes accessible again. So you can tag it and reuse it later. I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so optimal content for me is relevant, which is that curve I showed at the beginning, very closely aligned to the real world. It's engaging, and by that I mean people can actually engage. It's not just like interesting. it's engaging us, and they can respond. They can click on something and say, I like it. They can email you afterwards and ask questions. They can phone a rep and say, hey, can you come tell me more? So it becomes, it's leading people into that conversation. Timely, it's got to be hours, not weeks. Very important around key conferences. And obviously compliant. We must aim at making sure that the activities we do are ethical and compliant. Okay, so let's have a look at the modular content I talked about earlier. So it's quite a complicated slide, but I'll just talk you through it. So over on the right-hand side is the final output. Let's say a blog at conference. So you go to a scientific conference, you decide to produce a blog every single day with the conference highlights, with a little video, with some high-quality images of the key content, a little summary slide. Very useful for doctors, very useful for your team as well. In order to do that, you can have pre-prepared content that you produced before. You might know some of the data that's going in, or some of the studies that you can kind of pre-write. Even if you don't know the conclusions in the conference, you might know the 24-week data, but not the 48-week data. You can still pre-prepare the 24-week kind of write-up, ready with the key information in a few paragraphs. And then you can add in the 48-week presentation on the day. You're only adding in one paragraph on the end of 3, rather than having to write all 3 on the day. And you can pre-approve that up front, so everybody's comfortable with it and they know that's going to be used and it's there. But of course, for your data, you can write the whole thing. And we spent a long time trying to get data up front off scientific teams who are like, oh, but it's all embargoed. It's like, yeah, but we're not going to publish it. But we want to see the posters, we want to see the abstracts, so we can get our content ready before we go to the conference, pre-approved, before it goes to the conference. And then what you do is you assemble it on the day, you put in some local colour, so maybe top and tail with an intro and a little summary, that just kind of adds that feeling on the day of what's happened. And those 2 pieces of content which you've pre-drafted be top and tailed and go live on that day. So when it sits down, when the medic sits down to approve it on the day, they're seeing the grey bit they've never seen before, but it's just saying, hey, welcome to dubrovnik, we're having a fantastic time at the conference. And then the 2 pieces they've already seen that have just been completed. And that's much, much quicker and easier for them to respond. And as part of that, you might have some tweets and other things as well. And this kind of use of modular content also means you can then tag that content and put it back into a content store, whether that's just a folder on your intranet. It doesn't have to be, Viva Medcom's Vault, massively complicated store. It could just be a folder which you've just put in different things. You can tag it with things like promotional, non-promotional, tag it with the key data, the trial names, etc. And that means you can find it again and understand what that content can be reused for. So at the next conference, you can pull that out and go, right, well, we're going to update the 48-week data now with the 96-week data. Let's have a look at what we wrote last time. Pull out that study again and start from that, which is much quicker and easier than starting from the beginning. All of these are very simple tricks and tips, but they're very powerful. They change something that is very complicated and difficult into something that's very slick and effective. Okay, so those are the tips that I mentioned, the key principles. Okay, so let's have a look at real-time expert engagement. So I'm going to focus on traditional advisory boards because we do a lot of them, because they're really working at the moment. We use it for if you imagine we're managing a website, we're regularly updating it, we've got a blog on it, we've got a news section, and we use advisory boards to get advice on that content. Get doctors to go to a conference, we might file and then pay them to be there, so they're working for us there. They then give us advice on the key topics. They give us their perspective on those key topics. And it's better than traditional advisory boards because they can give their opinions asynchronously over time. They don't have to be in a room at a certain point. They can actually give little tips and tricks over time, which is much more useful if you're going to manage like a website over a long period. So we use it for all sorts of different things. I mean, the website's one example. We might use it over key periods of like a launch of a product or a key trial being launched. And there's all various reasons to use them. And they're a very good way of getting insight so that we can then produce really highly relevant and timely content off the back of the external insight. So I mentioned those, that's cool. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of case studies. So we've developed MedCrowd, which is an instant messaging technology for health and care. It's used clinically by people in the NHS and globally to talk about patients and their care. So it's a bit like WhatsApp, but it's secure and compliant with the healthcare regulations and requirements, HIPAA and the NHS requirements, UK Data Protection Law, EU GDPR, etc. So people can store confidential data on there, which is good for companies because that also means that it's compliant for the IT team and procurement team's MSAs as well, so that you're confident that your business information is also secure. And we use messaging because participants love it. It's much easier than having complicated kind of research like communities where people have to hang out and have to kind of give opinions all the time. They just want to say something and they can just do that with messaging. It also means that they find it very easy to learn because it's messaging. It's just like WhatsApp, and most people use that now. And we had one doctor who said, I don't want to do this, it's not my thing. And I had a chat with him and said, look, give it a go. You might like it. And they did it over a conference, and at the end, the top prof turned around to me and said, that was fantastic, I now understand why my teenage daughters do social media. Because for him, this was perfect social media, a closed, secure group with some of his colleagues who he knows really well, talking about topics he really cares about in a really convenient way from his pocket, rather than having to be in a room in Manchester or somewhere else. And that really worked for him. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to mention was we just, last week, we just also introduced video calling. We've released video calling. It's web-based at the moment, not in the app, but it'll come along in the apps as well. But video calling means you can actually have virtual advisory boards as well, where people can connect through their browsers to have just a quick chat as well, which is really nice because that is like video calling in WhatsApp, but you can talk to multiple people at the same time. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of case studies. So the first one is some conference experts. So similar to what I said before, we took a group of people specifically to a conference to give us insights on the sessions. We gave them a little plan of what sessions we wanted them to attend and a plan of the questions we would be asking. We also said we might have 2 or 3 other questions which would come out on the day depending on what we experienced. They had some pre-planned questions, and they also knew there's going to be some on-the-fly questions. We flew them out, we gave them accommodation, and paid them for their time because they're working for us as an advisory board. So the company felt that was acceptable, although I know some companies don't do that. This company did. And we flew them out there, and then they attended the sessions, and in the sessions, the questions were available on medCrowd. They could sit there with their iPhone app or Android app and just fire away, sending in messages of what they thought. And we could sit there, I wasn't at the conference, I could sit there watching it come live from the conference. And the company was also in those little chats, which was really nice. They could see that insight come in live. You could respond to it and ask questions and clarify points. So we sent 12 participants from 9 different cities, mainly in the UK, but there was one also from the US. And we had fantastic responses. So the first response to a question was in 6 minutes. We had almost 100% response rate across the questions, and tons of time and messages sent and conversations had, because it was so convenient. And we then used that insight to write a fantastic report that gave a beautiful summary for the company. They actually wanted this done internally, so we gave them an amazing report at the end, written up in slides, on the last day, and the second day. I think they got it the day after the conference, or very, very soon afterwards. The idea there being that they could then walk away from the conference with the conference highlights they needed to have already with the customer perspective in there. And what we're hoping to do is then use that to write this fantastic content and production, but with this project we didn't at that time. The other case study I want to mention is around drug launch, where we did another digital advisory board to look into how launching a drug was going to change home care services, thinking that the drug might be used or prescribed in the community. And they wanted to understand how that related to home care services. So they got together 6 participants, a small little group, 5 cities around the UK, key people who really understood home care services, and they asked them a bunch of questions about what they felt was going to change when this drug launched. And they were able to use that insight to kind of change their own practices and understand the commercial direction of their medicine. Again, lots of very fast, very high quality responses over time, and lots of engagement around the questions. So what I've tried to do is come out with some practical things. People often ask me, like particularly medical teams, they say, what can we do digitally? My answer is focus on content production, dynamic, fast content production, which is high quality. And digital advisory boards give you a practical way to get the real-time insights in so that you can produce really, really fantastic content that's meaningful for customers, that's valuable, and can actually really engage them and begin that really fantastic relationship with them, rather than just pushing stuff at them they don't find is useful. So hopefully that's been a very practical session. Come and see me, we're out there in the exhibition area, and thanks very much for listening. Cheers.